And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios, where you have close to a week to get all of the hot tub and golf time in before the rain starts. And we all know what happens here in Southern California when the rain starts. We lose our ability to drive. Mr. Randy Wangs at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, San Francisco Mayor London Breed wants all the holiday shoppers to treat downtown San Francisco like a strip club.
So all you shoppers out there, especially you visitors to San Francisco, I want you to make it rain.
Well, it's going to rain next week. I saw it in the forecast and on my phone.
Rain!
If it rains next week, we're going to have to play Cecily's Greatest Hits.
We might. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the host of Morning Edition on NPR and author of the new book, Differ We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America, available online at Amazon.com. You can follow him on Twitter at NPR Inskeep. Steve Inskeep, welcome to the show.
John, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Steve, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, and I want to talk to you all about the Abraham Lincoln book. But before we do that, I want to tell you that your book about John C. Fremont and his wife, Jessie, Imperfect Union, how Jessie and John Fremont mapped the West, invented celebrity, and helped cause the Civil War, is one of my favorites. Because,
wow.
And I'm sure I read it from a completely different lens than most of your readers likely, because for me, yes, it was about the mapping of the West, and yes, it was about manifest destiny and exploration and all of the subjects that you so eloquently described in the book. But for me, as a Californian, this is the story as to how we joined the Union. This is the story as to how California came to be. And it's a history that's not told that often in many places, including here in the state. You know, many people were from different parts of the globe or from different parts of the country. We don't know our own history. And it's a fascinating, fascinating tale that you told in that book. And I just wish that more people that lived in the state were aware of their own history, because it is something that is just mind-blowing.
Wow. Thank you. I'm really honored that you'd say that. And I agree, it is a mind-blowing history. It's really complicated and weird, the story of how John C. Fremont, this Western explorer who was supposed to be mapping the United States, wandered over the mountains a couple of different times into what was then Mexico and ended up playing a very strange and convoluted and somewhat accidental role in making it part of the United States. It is really a crazy story. So I appreciate you saying such kind things about my treatment of it.
Well, and I'll tell you this too. It's very it's almost related to the news cycle that we're dealing with right now. The story that you told about the state's first constitutional convention, where we had people who came from the Deep South. We had people who came from New England. We had people who came from the Middle West. We had people who came from Hawaii, the Orient, from Mexico. I guess they were the native Californians back then, Native Americans. Yeah. And you had this group of people that all got together, and they had the task of having to hammer out this Constitution. And the decision that they made that day was so consequential for the nation to enter the country as a free state without a corresponding slave state, which tipped the balance of power in this country where we never went back. Without California, we may not have had the Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom of the slaves.
I think that's very possible. I guess we should explain for people that the country was divided between free and slave states, and people had made a lot of effort to make sure that the number was equal, so that the South would have equal power in the Senate. And finally, this one extra free state broke through, and the North kind of gradually added more to its power and never really looked back. It is a really key moment in this series of events that led in the 1800s up to the ultimately the Civil War, to the South saying, we don't have enough control anymore. We want to break up the country and leave it, which, of course, is the reason that they tried to break up the Union and the reason they fired the first shot in the war.
The book, again, is Imperfect Union, How Jesse and John Fremont Mapped the West, Invented Celebrity, and Helped Cause the Civil War. If you're interested in the history of your state, it's certainly a great place to start and tell so many of the stories that really explain a lot of what we live with today and why we live with it today, and why so many of the cities are named what they're named, and why so many of the streets are named what they're named, and those sorts of things. It's a great place to start, so definitely check that out. All right, Steve, let's switch to your new book, which is Different We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America. You approached this book very differently than just a traditional biography where you tell the story about where someone was born, where they were educated, what they did in their life, that sort of thing. You didn't go for the traditional biography with this book. You went in a different direction. Can you explain that?
Yeah. I had this notion that I could tell Lincoln's whole life story through his meetings with different people. And I initially had that idea because we have this super diverse country now, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. And I had realized that America was very diverse in the 1800s as well, even though really white men had all the power and attention. But there were all these other different kinds of people. So I thought, what if I put a bunch of these different kinds of people in front of Lincoln and learn how he managed it? And as I got into it, I realized the story wasn't just difference, different races, different classes, different genders, different backgrounds. The story was disagreement. Most of these people were people that thought Lincoln was super wrong about something, or he was pretty sure they were very wrong about something. And it often was something really big like slavery. But he didn't isolate himself from them. He didn't ostracize them. He didn't just denounce them or say they were morally wrong. He tried to figure out ways to deal with them, to make them into allies if he could, or if that was impossible, to figure out some transaction they could do, or if even that was impossible, to just figure out some way that he could make use of them or learn from that encounter. And I think there's a big insight there. It's a simple one, but I think a lot of us have missed it, and that is that the person across the table from you who is very, very wrong, even though they're wrong, they still have a vote. They have the same vote that you have, and so you've got to figure out some way to deal with them. And I think that's an art that a lot of us have maybe lost or been taught not to practice.
A lot of people, when they run for office, from city council all the way up to president, they run as outsiders. Very few people want to run as being a professional politician. That being said, based on what you're saying, there are certain vocational qualities that one needs as a professional politician, if that's what you're going to do, to get it done, to push the ball over the finish line.
I think we should maybe, there's a lot of politicians that give us reasons to disdain politicians, right? But I think maybe we should reconsider our general idea of the craft, because someone who practices politics is practicing democracy. The whole point of democracy is that we have a free society. We're very different people from different places and backgrounds, just like you were saying about Californians coming from everywhere. And so we're not going to agree about everything or even most things. It would be really weird and totalitarian even if we did agree on everything. And so what we need is not for everyone to agree, but just enough of us to agree to sustain the country to make a majority. And that takes politics, and that calls for politicians. And Lincoln, even though we hold him up as a saint or a genius or any number of other things, a miracle, he was a politician. And that was his craft, was studying people and thinking about people and thinking about their interests and even their self-interest. How could he appeal to their self-interest in a way that would unite enough of them and a majority to do the right thing, which in his time was ending slavery?
What was the toughest nut for him to crack?
Oh, gosh. I would say it was some of the slave owners who were among the 16 people in this book. There was a guy named Duff Green, who'd been a friend of his for years, who was a slave owner, who was a pro-slavery propagandist and newspaper man, who came to Lincoln after Lincoln was elected president. but before he took office in the transition, and tried to persuade him, talk him out of the Civil War, basically. The southern states were upset that an anti-slavery candidate had won the presidency, and they were beginning to try to leave the Union, just reject the results of the election and leave the Union. And Duff Green went to Lincoln and tried to persuade him to compromise, quote unquote, with the South by agreeing to constitutional amendments that would enshrine slavery forever. And Lincoln wanted to be friendly with this guy who he'd known for years and wanted to be accommodating if he could, but just wasn't going to go there and wasn't willing to do that. That was a compromise he ultimately was not willing to make. He ended up taking office saying to somebody else, my job as president is to run the machine as it is, not to let people just leave the country because they don't like the results of an election. He stood firm there and essentially allowed the South to start the war, and then, of course, fought the war to its conclusion because he wasn't going to throw away that principle just to be able to take his job peacefully.
We're speaking with Steve Inskeep, author of the book, Differ We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America, available online at Amazon.com. How much of this was learned and how much of this was Lincoln's personality?
Well, his personality was very open and talkative, and yet also secretive. He talked all the time, but he used it almost like a magic trick to cast attention away from himself. Or he would be reminded of a funny story when somebody asked him a hard question, and he'd never get around to answering the question. But a lot of it was learned because he had to empathize with other people, not necessarily sympathize or decide that they were right and that he was wrong, but empathize, by which I mean understand who they were and what motivated them, what drove them. And I discovered in looking at the accounts of Lincoln's youth even, Lincoln as a boy studying the grown-ups around him and then asking his parents a million questions about the grown-ups they knew so that he could understand everything about them. And there are stories like that all through history, this guy being an observer. He learned his craft, which I think is another thing that we tend to lose. We tend to think people are talented or not, but you work at it. And he worked at politics, and he worked at understanding other human beings, and he worked at being patient with other human beings and trying to get what he could out of them. These were learned skills that he built on top of that, brilliant mind and interesting personality that he had to begin with.
I'm a big believer, whether it's as a broadcaster or politician or comedian, whatever profession you're referring to, it's never a good look to come at something from a place of anger. It's okay to be angry, but it's never a good look to come at it from a place of anger. How did he, and I'm sure he got very angry at various times in his life, how did he manage to put that aside when he went to the bargaining table or went into a relationship that was falling apart and not come at it from a place of anger?
Oh, man. Well, first off, I'm impressed that you've been able to survive in talk radio and not believe in anger. I mean, that's really something, man. I'm impressed. But setting that aside for a moment, I think that he had an idea of the long term. He was always playing a long game. He had a sense of history as a long process, that there was the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal, and we weren't really practicing that at the time, and we still weren't practicing it at Lincoln's time. But his idea was this happens, you work at it, and you do the best you can today, and you save the rest for tomorrow. And so he had a realistic idea of what he could accomplish, and I think that gave him patience even when people did drive him crazy and make him angry. He would try to hold it in because he was thinking about the long view. And he also, I think, his empathy that I mentioned before for people helped him to understand why people might be idiotic in his view or frustrating in his view. And he didn't necessarily expect them to be better than they were. He understood them as human beings. And so he would just try to get what he could out of them, even though some of the characters in this book, George McClellan, the general, comes to mind, just were extraordinarily frustrating to him, day after day after day, month after month after month, year after year.
And would it be difficult for him to cut bait when he realized that he's just hitting his head against the wall, or would he keep going?
I think it was a little hard for him. I think this has been true of a lot of presidents. They struggle to fire people when they think they need to be fired or when they clearly need to be fired. And it took him a long time to realize in that instance I mentioned that he needed to get rid of General George McClellan. His administration anyway, finally figured out this way to sort of order McClellan's army away from him without really firing him at all and just leaving him with no command. And then there was a crisis, and Lincoln needed an extra general, and he realized that McClellan, this guy who he'd gone to such effort to kind of get rid of, was the guy that he needed. And Lincoln reached back and used him to get one more battle out of him. And it turned out to be a really important battle. So that was a case where he probably could have acted a lot sooner, but it worked out for him in the end.
Last question before you go, and I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball for this one because there's no way to answer it correctly, I guess. And that is, we spend a lot of time talking about what presidents do when they're out of office. Former presidents, do they play golf and go away and come here to Palm Springs and have a good time? Do they write books like Dick Nixon? Do they build houses like Jimmy Carter? We, of course, don't know the answer to what kind of former president Abraham Lincoln would have been because he never was allowed to get there. But given everything that you've learned about him through the research for this book, what type of former president do you think he would have been had he lived long enough to be one?
I thought the thing that former presidents do is they get indicted, but never mind. We won't talk about that right now. I mean, I don't know, but I wish that moment had come. One of the many reasons that Lincoln is so mysterious is he didn't get to write a memoir. And so there are a lot of incidents in his life where we have somebody's account of what Lincoln did, but we don't have Lincoln's own account of what he was thinking. He didn't write a book during his lifetime, and I don't really know that he would have as a former president. But I would have liked to know. I would have liked for somebody to come by and interview him about different things. Now, it could be that he would have been just as careful in his post-presidency as he was in his presidency, and would only have told us what he wanted people to know. He was an extraordinarily careful talker, and he was also good at being silent on things that he didn't want to speak out about. So I really don't know, except if that memoir had ever been written, I would be reading it.
Steve Inskeep, the author of the book, Differ We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America, available online at Amazon.com. You can follow him on Twitter at NPR Inskeep and get him online at SteveInskeep.com. Steve Inskeep, thanks so much for sharing your time with us today.
Glad to do it, John, and stay unangry. Congratulations.
Well, I can only guarantee that until I get in traffic, then all bets are off.
Well, it's California, so what can you ask?
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to go back and listen to a past episode, whether it be yesterday's show or a show from last week or something from the Wayback Machine, that's easy to do.
That's right. Go to KABC.com, click on podcasts, go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You could download all the episodes that way. You could do the easiest thing possible, download the KABC app, search KABC AM in the Apple App Store or the Android Store. Easiest way to listen live to the station whenever you're outside of the AM radio signal. The stream works great on there. And you can download all the podcasts of this show, podcasts from the past and podcasts from the present, like the 2 o'clock hour, which will be posted in about 30 minutes, where you can listen to John's interview with Steve Inskeep, including the very end of it.
Well,
He was amused.
Well,
That is a great laugh.
I enjoyed it.
Well,
Coming up later on this month, Randy, we're going on the road.
That's right. Come see us broadcast live Friday, November 17th at the brand new Gelson's West LA at West Edge on the corner of Olympic and Bundy. The Gelson's West LA at West Edge is open now. It's absolutely gorgeous in there. We're going to be broadcasting live from the Beer and Wine and Sushi Bar. We'll see you there Friday, November 17th from noon to 3.
In the meantime, what do you say we make a couple of listeners very happy?
Let's do that right now. 790 KABC welcomes Pentatonix and the most wonderful tour of the year at the Acrisure Arena on November 14th. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com, but right now, caller number 9 at 1-888-790-5222 gets a pair of tickets to the show. Tickets furnished by Live Nation. Good luck dialing.
Well, whether it's fires, whether it's the inability of our government to do something about the homeless encampments that start half of the fires, the floods, or anything else that we deal with in California, the crime, we're becoming uninsurable as a state. The legislature failed to act on that, and the governor passed the buck to the state insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara. Ricardo Lara plans to kick the can down the road and institute changes that will take place after he and Newsom are safely out of office, so you can't blame them. And Randy, the state's congressional delegation is not happy about it.
That's right. Over 25 California Congress members sent a letter to Ricardo Lara that was pretty much, can you do your job? For more on this, here is KTVU, Fox 2 in the Bay Area.
A new at 10 tonight, consumer advocates say California is at a crossroads on property insurance. 32 members of the California congressional delegation have now sent a letter to State Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara, urging him to stabilize the insurance market.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to get right on that.
Oh, yes, just like everything else.
KTV's Joey Horta is live now with what those lawmakers are calling for. Joey.
Well, they're talking about rates going up now, companies denying coverage, and some have already left the state. The insurance companies are saying that they can't afford to operate in California, so they want to see two things happen. Climate change and inflation are fueling problems for the insurance industry. Bay Area Congressman John Garamendi served as California's very first insurance commissioner.
The insurance companies are pulling out, they're canceling policies, and as you said, they're raising rates, in many cases without justification.
Garamendi claimed,
heck, they have drones that are spying on people, and they're canceling them just because their backyard looks a little cluttery.
And they also get caught just making things up. Remember that one guy that we talked to who said that his roof was deemed to be unsafe, but he had just replaced the roof a couple years before?
They're looking for any excuse to eliminate risk, even when it makes absolutely no sense. Which then why the hell are you in the insurance game to begin with? It's a gamble on both sides.
Garamendi claims the current insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, is handing over his authority to regulate the market to the insurance companies.
And that would be a long-term disaster and a short-term problem for every consumer in California.
The problem, destructive wildfires are making it too risky for insurance companies. United Policy Holders is a consumer protection group. Amy Bach is executive director.
Insurance companies are saying we cannot get our rates approved fast enough or high enough in California. And so until we do, we're not selling any more insurance.
Well, that's mean.
Well, what they want to do is they want to push the insurance commissioner to say, well, I had no other option but to give the industry what they want.
But what, are we going to end up like what's going on in Florida right now, where they're not canceling policies, but they're tripling the price for them? Because I'm not paying $6,000 to insure my house.
Well, if the option is to regulate them to the point to where they all pull out, then we're all going to end up on the state system, and the state system is barely surviving as is.
Insurers want climate prediction models, and they want to pass the rising costs onto consumers.
The commissioner made a deal with insurers that if they get two things they want, then they will start selling insurance again. The problem we have right now is the insurers are saying, We want to see where's the beef? We want to see what we get.
People are still saying that, huh?
Yeah, the 1980s called. They want their phrase back.
We want to see where's the beef? We want to see what we get before we give you what you want.
I would like you to Lego my ego.
Lawmakers are calling for transparency through public hearings and public comment before approving any rate increases, and to protect consumers before protecting corporations.
If you want to sell insurance in California, then you're going to abide by the rules, so you're going to have to serve all Californians. Not every policy in every place, but you should take a share of the risk. And he can force them to do that.
Yeah, but he's not going to.
No. And here's another part of this. How about cleaning up the homeless encampments that are causing 50% of the fires? How about cleaning up the brush? How about making sure the insurance companies take care of their faulty equipment? There are things that we can do that can reduce the risk of fire.
I think you meant power companies.
What did I say?
Insurance companies.
Oh, yes, the power companies, the utilities. Southern
Allstate
California
didn't
Edison.
burn down the state of California.
No.
PG&E did.
Let's clarify that. Not making that allegation. No.
Now, according to the California Department of Insurance, the commissioner will be proposing regulatory changes that would make insurance more available in areas that are prone to wildfires. A strategy will be introduced over the next year, guys.
Yeah. I'm glad he's acting with urgency on this as people's policies are getting canceled up and down the state.
No, this is what happens in a one-party state. He was going to be termed out of the state Senate, so he needed another job. There was not an open congressional seat where he lived, so he decided to run for insurance commissioner, even though he has no background at all in that world. He saw insurance commissioner as essentially being lieutenant governor of an industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real situation for so many California homeowners. Let's wait and see what the commissioner does. All right, Joey, thank you.
I think we'll be waiting quite a while.
Yes. He wants this to go away so he can run for something else and make it someone else's problem.
Look at my record. Look how many people have lost insurance under my leadership.
You know what I read in one of the papers? The job he wants next is to replace Hilda Solis on the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, boy.
Imagine if that man is Barbara Ferrer's boss.
Wow, that's amazing.
Babs, what do you think about that?
I have tech issues.
It's not really what we're talking about right now, Ferrer.
I have a hard time understanding logic.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, we've gotten so many emails about Congresswoman Katie Porter today. I figured we'd have to end the show with one, but since most of them are way too inappropriate for the air, I had to find one that was just on the line of something that we could say without getting in trouble or having to take yet another sensitivity class. This one comes from Mima. That Porter woman is nuts. Her son is doomed. The exercycle in the kitchen did crack me up. Maybe she really is that efficient.
It's a possibility.